For the continuation of our report, I am going to discuss about the materials and resources in teaching listening. In general, there are two different kinds of materials in teaching listening skills. First is the authentic materials. This includes anything that is unscripted. For example, live lectures and seminars, the English you hear on the television and radio, and English spoken outside the classroom. Coursebook materials are also helpful in teaching listening. This may include simulated lectures and seminar presentations and semi-scripted listening tasks from coursebooks. There are two types of texts used as materials in teaching listening. First is the scripted text. It is written down before the speaker speaks, or it is less natural. Second is the unscripted text that is not written down in advance but rather transcribed afterwards. It is more natural but often harder to follow because in real life people do not speak in an organized or structured way. We will now go down to the different resources to find authentic listening in the classroom. First is the guest speaker. The guest speaker may present a challenge to your students' listening comprehension. It will also be a good time for them to practice. You can bring in a speaker on any topic that you are covering in class, or just bring in someone who has the free time to talk about something that interests them. Follow up with a general review of what the person said and how much your students were able to understand. Next is you can have another teacher. The another teacher should be able to arrange a class swap fairly easily. Exposing your students to a different quality of voice is beneficial to their language learning process. TV commercials. These are short and often simple advertisements. Though you may not want to advertise a particular product in your classroom, the actors use clear but somewhat natural speech that should be easier for your students to understand. Though they will not get some of the comprehension clues they would from a live speaker, they will still be able to see facial expressions and the context of the language. You may want to talk about how the advertisers try to communicate their message through the commercial. Weather reports. The next step up to the listening activity difficulty spectrum would be using a weather report that has appeared on the news. Though its benefits are similar to that of the commercial, there is less context of your students to infer meaning as they watch. After playing the report for your students 2 or 3 times, ask some comprehension questions to see just how much information they are absorbing. Movies and television. Shows are the next step up in listening comprehension practice. An entire movie may be too long both for your class periods and for how much information your students can take in at one time. Try to limit your selection to about 10 minutes. With movies or television, your students still get visual input, but the speech will be more natural than the language used on news programs. In addition, you may have characters with accents, which will most likely be a difficult challenge for your students. Another one is the radio. The era of the cassette may be behind us, but that does not mean you should rule out radio clips as teaching aids. The benefit of radio voices in a news segment, weather segment, or talk segment is that pronunciation is much clearer, easier for your students to understand. The challenge with a radio clip will come with a lack of visual input that your students have to assist them. You can ask your students to listen for answers to specific questions or challenge them to infer the meaning of unfamiliar vocabulary from the context. And now, We are topping down the recorded materials in teaching listening skills. Recorded materials are listening inputs which have been specially scripted for teaching purposes. These materials has advantages and disadvantages. The advantages are the following. Enable a non-native English teacher to provide the audience with a variety of English sounds, voices, and accents. The used material is authentic by means of language and situational context. The distribution of recorded materials lets the teacher or a student to work with them according to their desire in the way to stop, restart, or repeat for several times in terms of analyzing or imitating unfamiliar speech patterns. They can be used automatically by a student anytime. While listening to the recorded materials, students listen to several speakers, their discussions and conversations. Video-based listening practice suggests videotape advantages and additionally provides the variety of visual support like gestures or mimics typical for real life and necessary for students to decipher speaker's message and interrelations. The contents, spears, themes, and phonetic input of recorded materials is more colorful compared to real-life listening comprehension. And the last advantage of the recorded materials in teaching listening skills is that it is easier to choose and prepare listening activities beforehand with the help of recorded materials. There are only two disadvantages of recorded materials. First, there is no straight communication between the listener and the speaker. Thus, there is no way to regulate the speed, rhythm, and other peculiarities of speech to work out the compensating strategies. Like, for example, stating the message contents with the help of the partner or within the students. Second is the audio and video materials are not always of a very good technical quality. This fact can make students rather confused and distract from productive and successful studying. Aside from the recorded materials, there is also live listening. It means listening to the teacher or another visitor in a face-to-face situation rather than using a pre-prepared recording. The advantages of live listening are the choice of the listening input. It is somewhat the acceptability of the language. Next is the ability of determination in case it is necessary, and also the minimal technical background noise. Another one is the ability of using visual aids. It is either mimics or gestures. And lastly, the reaction of the speaker. Next are the characteristics of listening process. First is the spontaneity. We listen to people speaking spontaneously and informally without rehearsing what we are going to say ahead of time. Second is the context. While listening, we know the relationship between the listener and the speaker. The situation helps to predict what we are going to hear. Third are the visual clues. Facial expression, gestures, and other body language are the surrounding environment. These visual clues help us predict and understand what we hear. Fourth is the listener's response. In a conversation, we can interrupt the speaker and ask for repetition or some clarification. And the fifth and last is the speaker's adjustment. The speaker can adjust the way of speaking according to the listener's reaction. He or she may rephrase or elaborate the topic to put it more in a detailed conversation. There are also considerations to listen text easier. There is only one speaker and the text is scripted. The speaker is using standard English pronunciation, and this doesn't mean that speaking with an accent is in any wrong or incorrect. You have some prior knowledge about what the speaker will say before you listen. And then you are also interested in the topic. And also, you know some of the vocabulary that will be used. Listening materials and resources should have purposes so that it will have sense or use. The following are the purposes of the listening materials and resources. There are many purposes for listening materials and resources, such as to determine a speaker's intended message, being able to thoughtfully respond to a speaker's message, to enhance one's ability to comprehend, and to encounter different vocabulary. In conclusion, we must know the importance and use of the materials and resources in teaching listening skills, and we should focus on the process of listening rather than on the result of listening. And that's all for my report, and now I will give the floor to the next reporter, Miss Josephine Mendo.